our systems would become more sustainable, at least from an environmental perspective. The big task now is to make them sustainable also from an economic perspective.
Professor Dr. Jens Dauber, thank you very much for joining the Jord Festival podcast and bringing your knowledge and expertise over to our audience. It's greatly appreciated. You're obviously a major expert on biodiversity with 175 publications to your name. Maybe you can just give us a bit of a background as to what made you study biodiversity and what your journey has been so far.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me to this podcast. Yeah, by training, I'm a landscape ecologist and entomologist, so biologist basically. And I started not in agriculture with my research, but more in urban systems, conducting an urban mapping of ants in the city of Mainz in Germany. And yeah, this connected me strongly to entomological questions and ecology. And then I continued at the University of Gießen with my PhD, and there I went into agricultural systems. And here the question was in peripheral systems on marginal areas, how to continue with farming in areas which are facing abandonment and where agriculture is basically ceasing to exist, and to find new ways of providing farmers with income. And again, we looked at biodiversity perspectives, both of farmland abandonment, but also of new production systems. And from there, I moved into more productive systems, and now I'm here head of the Institute of Biodiversity at the Thünen Institute. And now we're here working on all aspects of biodiversity in agricultural systems, in plant production systems, but also in grassland systems, where it's more about livestock production. And yeah, we are looking at the soil, in particular, soil biodiversity, but also above ground, and in particular, of course, on ecosystem services of those organisms such as pollinators and biocontrol agents, and how they can help us with creating more sustainable production systems.
It's a fascinating area, and there's so much just in your introduction that we could talk through. And I think especially around farmland abandonment, I mean that's something that's prevalent all across, especially Western societies, but very, very much so. And we see in Norway one farm a day closing and farmland abandonment, and the farmland really being used just for grass for feeding livestock is typically what it's used for. So yeah. I'd be very interested to know, in the research that you've done, you talked about converting farmland back into being productive or used for biodiversity. So I'm assuming that the farmland has been abandoned due to economic reasons or farmers retiring or those types of things. What did you see as being the sort of powerful things that could happen to that farmland to improve income revenues for farmers?
Yeah, exactly. As you said, so mostly it's economic reasons. So it's in particular in areas which are more remote from the markets, where the soils are not as productive, and usually it's also hilly areas where it's more difficult to produce annual crops. And in these areas, there's a lot of abandonment. And there will be more abandonment also in Germany due to demographic changes. So that there are older farmers now, people are leaving those areas. And yes, we found out that this is not very good for biodiversity. So often we have the idea that More natural systems are better for biodiversity, but if the degree of abandonment is too high, you get shrubs, and then you get kind of forest systems, and often, in particular, those species which are adapted to this open, and also some to open landscapes, but also to disturbance, they will vanish. And those are the species which are typical for our farming systems, and in particular, for example, the same natural grasslands, which are also very important in Scandinavia. So those systems are threatened. And the question is, how can we restore this? And I mean, one possibility is to come up with new ideas for grazing systems. So make grazing, extensive grazing, more profitable again. This is one solution. Another possibility is to, when it comes to cropping systems, annual cropping systems, to find probably also new resources. I mean, you cannot produce high quality wheat in those areas often, but there may be other crops which can be relevant. It could also be, for example, biomass crops. So for new bioeconomy, we have new requirements for bio-based resources. So question would be, is there a market? Are there possible value chains for such alternative crops in such areas?
Yeah. Okay. So I get there's a few points there. I guess one of them is, so basically what you're saying is that because the natural system that existed was converted to farmland, that farmland itself has become its own local ecosystem.
Yeah.
And through abandonment, then that ecosystem effectively degrades, and there becomes a biodiversity challenge through the abandonment of it. And so what you're saying is that that process needs to be managed to maintain the ecosystem.
Exactly, the agricultural ecosystems. But of course, it depends also. I mean, that's also a decision that has been made by society. So where are our aims when it comes to conservation of biodiversity? If we focus on more forest biodiversity and looking in particular at species that are connected to forest ecosystems, I mean, they can be supported if we rewild such areas. If we say, okay, agriculture is no longer profitable in those areas, so let's change them back into a more natural situation, so rewild them. This is one strategy. But in this case, we, of course, focus on a different set of organisms. It's fine. We can have it as a goal. It's a valid goal to do that. But if we say, no, we would like to keep those landscapes open because they're very typical for our region. They are, this is connected also to the people living there. We would like to keep the landscape open. Then you have to find a way of keeping it open. And then you support a different set of species and a different set, of course, of ecosystem functioning. So basically different ecosystems. And this is a general decision you have to make up front. In which direction you would like to go, and then if you decide to keep it open, then it becomes quite complicated because then you have to find ways of introducing this disturbance, which is no longer introduced by the farmers. And in nature conservation in Germany, for example, when we were working in this area, we saw that nature conservation always thinks grasslands are a great thing, so we need large areas of permanent grassland. Which is true, but if you do not have the proper farming with a proper disturbance regime and you only mulch the systems, again, with this mulching on a large scale, you reduce diversity. So in these former systems where you had a frequent, where you also had grassland, but this grassland was frequently disturbed every now and then, every couple of years, it was transformed back into an annual system. It was plowed up. You had a much higher diversity of species in those areas.
I mean, that's quite fascinating, isn't it? Because I mean, I guess the natural thought process is leave nature to do its thing. But if man has already been there and disturbed the natural thing already, and a localized ecosystem has been created. I mean, I see it here within our ecosystem in Norway. You know, we live on the side of a small farm area, and in the clearings, you know, we get a huge number of roe deer. We see rabbits, hares, we have lynx, foxes, lots of birds, and moose, and they like the open areas and they like the clearing. And yeah, I can see, you know, you change the setup of the land and it would change the types of animals that go there. And you see it as well, you know, when you clear out areas of forest, you know, you thin out forest, and then a forest that isn't particularly attractive because there's too many trees too close together, suddenly, you know, you clear out and thin that area out, and suddenly there's a lot more wildlife there that goes there. There's more light that gets through, there's more mycelium. You know, it seems to be with small changes quite a big impact on just a very localized ecosystem. You mentioned as well about soil and soil health, and this region in particular is known for being quite a clay-based. Yeah, there's a lot of clay here. What are the types of things that can be done either at a local level for people at home that want to grow stuff in their garden, or on a small scale farming side of things to improve soil health, and how do we monitor and measure soil health?
Yeah, if you have in particular heavy clay soils in the normal farming, so of course you have problems with your gardening as well. You can find ways of improving the soil, but with machinery on those soils, it's also very difficult in agriculture. So what farmers in our area are doing more is to stop plowing up the land and having more permanent, or trying to establish permanent soil cover or direct seeding into the soil, so disturb the soil less, which is also good when it comes to climate change, when it comes to heat stress for the soil. There are simple measures with a spade where you can open the soil, have a look at the soil, smell the soil, see the texture of the soil to get some indication on soil health. When it comes to more professional monitoring, maybe on larger scales, so we're at the minute investing into a national soil monitoring program and trying to identify microbiome indicators for soil health, which isn't an easy task, but we try to understand more the interactions between those microorganisms in the soil, how they are affected by disturbances, how they improve resilience of soil functioning, and from this develop indicators to, in the end, inform policy of how to improve soil health with their strategies and interventions. That's a big task we're working on at the minute, and we try and hope we get more funding on this in the future. And the soil monitoring law of the European Commission is hopefully going into the right direction.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, and I guess that's one of the biggest challenges as we've gone from you know, traditionally most small farmers would have grown multiple crop and done crop rotation, and now with the economic pressures, and you mentioned earlier about competition and cost of managing livestock and all the rest of it, and I think what one of the challenges is you know, you're not just competing with your neighbor anymore, you're competing with in a global economy where meat in China or New Zealand or wherever it might be is there's trade agreements that support importing of food, so you're competing against farmers the other side of the world, which also causes quite significant challenges around that. That's put pressure on farmers to then move into specializing and growing single crop so that they can focus on less equipment, better economies of scale, and greater efficiencies within the farm. But what's the cost of doing that longer term on soil health and biodiversity?
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. So I wouldn't go as far as single crop. I mean, we hardly see single crops, but it's very short rotations most of the time. And depending on the soil you're on, it could be a short winter wheat, winter barley, and also drape rotation, which is very typical in Germany. And the farmers are pressed into these short systems and for economic reasons, of course, as you mentioned. That's absolutely correct. And crop diversification of cropping systems would be a good alternative. But here the problem is indeed that many of those alternative crops cannot compete on the markets, or we do not have the value chains established. We do not have the necessary infrastructure for processing of those foods, for example, or the when it comes, for example, to legumes or other protein crops, often the import of those crops, it's much cheaper than producing them at home.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's absolutely correct. So yeah, I mean, those crops, such crop diversifications would be really helpful when it comes to stabilizing the soils and keeping soils healthy, or in general, not only the soils, but also other species above ground in those systems. Because in the long run, of course, having such short crop rotations, they can only be stable when it comes to production and yield when you have a lot of external inputs of fertilizers and plant protection products. And if they become more expensive or less available, and this is also something we may have to face, we already see some such trends, and we may have to face this even more in the future, given the global political situation at the minute. We probably cannot rely on such external resources alone. So we have to find other ways of keeping our soils productive. And for this, but here, from our perspective, when it comes to biodiversity, I mean, if we speak about soil microbiome, about soil animals, we always focus, or we have a strong focus on the particular field and the soil of this field. But when it comes to biodiversity in general and ecosystem functions and ecosystem services such as pollination, natural biocontrol, which are also very important for this production, we also have to look at the landscape scale and see the context in which our fields are embedded in, because we also need a certain, well, crop diversification is of course not only operating at the field scale, but has an impact also on the landscape scale. But what we see in our research is that crop diversification alone is not enough. What we also need is to increase the heterogeneity of the whole landscape. So we need also semi-natural habitats in the landscape, hedgerows. We need field margins with a lot of flowers. We need perennial crops. We need soils outside the fields where those species can hibernate, where they can reproduce, so that they can build up long-lasting populations to fulfill those functions and services. So for us, biodiversity management and using biodiversity in production systems is always a landscape perspective.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, isn't it? It's not just about the immediate farmland that you're managing. It's about the whole environment around that farmland and how that's supporting biodiversity. Just on the topic of the sort of the mono farming and the use of chemicals, and yeah, you can definitely see the costs are going up and the challenges around importing ammonias and chemicals for creating fertilizers and pesticides and stuff. What's the long-term impact on, because I guess we've either got a natural ecosystem, which in my mind is you have heritage seeds, which tend to favour local conditions, versus at the moment, there's a huge focus on genetically modified and controlled seeds, and the promise of GMO seeds was that you need fewer pesticides and fewer fertilizers because the seeds had been modified so that you didn't need those things. But actually, I think the results are quite interesting, because the results are you still need a significant amount of pesticides and fertilizers. What are you seeing from an ecology point of view on the difference between heritage seeds and natural systems versus genetically modified seeds and chemical treatments?
So I'm not completely dogmatic about those things. I think, of course, it would be nice to have more natural systems, or at least nature-based solutions for farming, to make farming more resilient, more sustainable in many ways. But at the same time, it's clear that such more natural systems are not as predictive, not as controllable as those systems which are based on external inputs. Although in those systems, at least in the short run, you know exactly what fertilizer to use, in which quantities, you know which plant protection measures to use, in which quantities, and you have a very likely success when it comes to your yield. So you can sleep well at night as a farmer, probably more than in those natural systems. But again, you have to apply much more ecological knowledge into your farming.
So I guess just to sort of summarize, in terms of, if we look at the question, how can farming evolve to better support ecosystem health? What you're saying is that more diversification, especially around farmland edges, hedgerows, perennial plants that support pollinators, and some of those things, those are some of the small steps, and in reality they're quite simple steps that farmers can take without really losing any productive land on the field, because you're just talking about the edges and hedgerows and stuff. Would that be a fair summary, or are there other sort of obvious things that they could be doing?
No, I mean, that's a fair summary. So we have this rule of thumb that we need something like depending on the area, between 10 and 20% of semi-natural habitat or area in a landscape, which is neatly spread between the fields where we have our production systems, so that we can establish all the populations of the pollinators, of the biocontrol agents. And then, of course, when it comes to the fields themselves, we have to go into more diversified systems and reduce the external inputs of fertilizers and pesticides. Basically, if we come to such a solution, our systems will become more sustainable, at least from an environmental perspective. The big task now is to make them sustainable also from an economic perspective. And here we are often stuck in lock-ins, where, I mean, we're working together with many farmers who are really willing and going into such directions because they have to adapt to climate change. They realize their crop rotations are no longer working in the way they've done before. So they see there's a need of innovation, of moving further in the way they are producing. They're really willing to do that, but they tell us, but we're stuck. We cannot do this. If we would do this, if we would go also into all these experimentations, we're risking in ruining our farming, and we would have to abandon farming because we simply cannot afford it.
I mean, it's a big challenge, isn't it, balancing yield versus biodiversity, because you get paid for what you grow. You don't get paid for how healthy what you grow is. You don't get paid on the nutritional value of food, or how biodiverse the land is that you've created. You only get paid on the yield of whatever crop it is that you have, or farmland that you have.
I mean, there are ideas about so money for common goods, producing common goods for producing ecosystem services. This could be a way of providing income to farmers for such alternative benefits they are providing to society. There are ideas how to do that, but at the minute, politics are going into a different direction again. So let's see. We really hope that in the next CAP for the EU, in the next CAP round, those criteria will be important still to policy.
Yeah, let's hope so. I mean, it's I've always had a view that a healthy planet takes care of itself. You know, we have these strange fascinations. You know, the one at the moment is really around carbon and CO2, and you know, I see here, you know, the literally the cutting down of mountains to put wind turbines on, and you think the environmental impact of taking down forests, building roads, putting wind turbines up, extending the power network, that environmental impact is for me extremely high, and doesn't necessarily solve the energy challenge or the CO2 challenge. And I kind of feel that actually, if we have better biodiversity and more balanced ecosystem, then actually we don't need to focus on carbon or nitrogen or any other elements within the atmosphere, because the environment will manage them. Obviously, burning billions of barrels of oil doesn't help, but that doesn't help from a biodiversity and ecology system.
No, of course it doesn't help, but I mean, speaking about wind turbines, I mean, you're in Norway, you're quite well off with water, so you have a lot of energy from your water. In Germany, we don't have that, not in that amount, so we have to find other ways when it comes to sustainable energy production. And there, wind turbines, of course, play a major role together with solar. If we do not want to go into the direction of atomic energy again, nuclear energy power plants, yeah, we need a good mix and an appropriate mix of such sustainable energy systems. And again, this is also connecting to agriculture again, because we also have to think about electrification of agricultural production systems. I mean, we still need farming equipment, we need machinery, and there's been a big discussion about cutting the subventions on gasoline for farmers, but no discussion about how to change or how to electrify their systems and how to support this. So there are many aspects when it comes to farming, and it's not only about rotations and keeping the soil healthy, but also how to use energy in the farming sustainably for farming.
Yeah, I mean, it's energy has to be one of the single largest cost factors in running a farm as well, whether it's you know, in diesel for tractors or electric power for running buildings and other aspects of it. So it's yeah, it's a big challenge, and that challenge has gone a lot higher in the last few years, because a lot of the energy that's being created in Norway is, of course, being exported to Germany. So it's, you know, it's like a whole European challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, your wealth in Norway is based on oil and gas.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's an ironic ecosystem. It's the seen as a green country, but there's this like hush factor of behind it. Not everything is as green as it looks.
Yeah.
So yeah, tell me a little bit about the current projects that you're involved in. You mentioned some of the EU directives, soil health, soil measurement. What are the other things that you're looking at the moment?
So at the minute, we're involved in various projects where we apply so-called living lab approaches. So both EU projects, but also national projects, where we work together with farmers and other stakeholders in certain areas, and we try to develop in a co-design and co-learning environment how to make progress when it comes to landscape design, designing our production systems. Basically all we talked about, so how can we improve diversification of cropping systems, how can we improve establishment of semi-natural habitats, how can we improve the field margins, how can we implement flower strips in the landscapes, etc., together with the farmers, not going there and saying, we are the scientists, we know how it works, please do it for us, but to work together with them, so that we also learn from the farmers which of our ideas are really applicable in the farming systems and where we are simply going astray and where we have to learn, okay, this is not working for whatever reasons, phytosanitary reasons or whatever, or there's a lack of machinery, but there are other ways of achieving such goals. So we're working closely together, for example, to improve biomass and ecosystem services of insects in the landscape. So how can we make a farming landscape more insect friendly, for example?
No, that's brilliant. I'm a really big fan of the living lab because I think there can be quite a big disconnect sometimes between theory and practice, and so much variable in the practical side of things based on local conditions and all types of input factors. So it's I think that's really really good work to be able to do that and to be able to take the theoretical approach and then actually see it in a transformative way, because you can actually go there and see what's happening, your research in action. So yeah, that's brilliant. So just with regards to the living lab, how long have these been projects going for, and how much longer have you got to run on those?
Yeah, so one of the bigger projects where we have 3 so-called landscape labs. Each of these labs is 900 hectare, and in each of these labs we work with between 10 and let's say 30 farmers. We started in end of 2018 with this one, so we're in the 3rd phase of our funding now, and probably it's going to be the last phase because there are changes in the funding conditions in Germany at the minute, but ideally we would go into a 4th phase, and then we would have a total of 12 years to work with the farmers.
The the farm that we're having the festival on, the Yard Festival, which you've kindly agreed to come and talk at, which we're looking forward to, that's effectively a living lab environment, and one the farmer there, Lars, he's very into permaculture and biodiversity. He's planning to plant a lot of different trees, hedgerows. He's just got some livestock in, so he's looking at all aspects on how to improve soil health, measure soil health, and do some of those things. So it's, from our point of view, it's it's really reassuring to see people like that are very focused on these things. I guess just from the established living lab projects that you have, what's been the results that you've seen so far? You've said about the monitoring that you've put in place. What have been the results so far? Have you had any sort of main surprises or major learning events?
I mean, the learning event is of course to see how farmers are willing to go when it comes to redesigning the way they're doing the farming. I mean, usually you start with, let's see, the low entry schemes, so the low hanging fruits, things that can be easily established, such as catch crops and things like that, or flower strips. But then we found out that many farmers are willing to go the next steps into more complicated, more sophisticated measures. Some have started really to explore on undersowing in their oilseed rape, for example, use legumes as undersowing to fight flea beetles and things like that. Or they went into very happy to start with strip cropping systems, or establish special flower strips for biocontrol agents within their fields. And they cannot be sure in which direction this goes. And some of these experiments go quite well, and others basically fail, but that's okay, because such failures is part of the living lab. Of course, you have to gather experience here. I mean, often these things work when we do them in the field experiments, but then we go to the field and things fail, and then we have to figure out why. And I mean, this is an interesting process. And of course, when it comes to the monitoring, we could see, for example, we were monitoring also ecosystem services in the landscape. So not only on individual fields, but all over the landscape. We are looking, for example, at weed seed predation. We had small trays with weed seeds we put into the landscape. And then you could see, yeah, you have this function of seed predation in the landscape, but you have it at the side of the fields, you have it in the semi-natural elements of the fields, but you do not see it that much within the field, where you would expect that this function is required for the farmer. And then you think, why is this so? And then you realize, okay, you do not have so many seed-producing plants in the field because of herbicide use, of course. And then, of course, you do not have the organisms going in there to feed on the seeds, because the seeds are basically not present. So, and that's when it comes to using, for example, such ecosystem services in production systems. So it's probably not possible to say, okay, I stop using pesticides, for example, without providing alternatives, because you do not have, you basically, in the landscape, there's still a potential for those services or those functions, but in order to get them in the fields, you have to create additional measures that attract those organisms fulfilling those functions back into the fields.
I mean,
so you need a longer term perspective of transformation and change of your production system than you may expect.
I'm wondering if in your living lab, have you seen any conditions where you've taken a traditional farmer that's been working in that sort of way, that has managed to reduce their reliance on chemicals, and to what extent have they managed to do that?
Yeah, I mean, there are some really innovative farmers, and one of them has many years ago already converted from plowing to low or no-till system. And he's very concerned about the soil, and he's establishing those catch crops, which he designed himself in the composition and so on. And he managed in this way to reduce also the use of herbicides, but he also says, yeah, I cannot reduce it completely. I still rely on them.
Yeah. Have you seen the AI based laser systems that go behind the tractor and scans for weeds and zap those? Just on the future of farming and where technology's playing a role. Have you seen? I mean, obviously that's quite an innovative way of dealing with weeds. What are your thoughts on some of those technologies and their impact on farming?
Yeah. If a farmer has the land that's suitable for that and has the money to establish such machinery and the use of such AI tools, that's probably great. I mean, we see already some approaches of spot spraying. There's a combination of UAVs and tractor-based sensors where you can use such systems, and you can substitute those chemicals with laser, as you said, or hot water or some other systems, which would be great to reduce the general load of pesticides in the landscape. At the same time, looking from a biodiversity perspective, if those systems are really efficient, if you laser, basically, to say it in this way, if you laser away everything which is not crop, and you're as efficient in doing this with as you are with a herbicide, there's not much improvement for biodiversity. If you have, on the other hand, an AI system which is able to differentiate between a true weed which can cause economic damage and a weed which is basically not really a weed but only a herb growing in the field without being any problem for the crop, and lasering away only the weed and not the other herb, then we can find an improvement, or we'll have an improvement in biodiversity. But this also means in the mindset of the farmers that they have to change to a mindset tolerating plants other than their crops in a field. Yeah? And
So you're
that's
saying
another perspective of technology. If you use the technology with a different mindset, you can improve biodiversity. If you use it with the same mindset you had before, yeah, you reduce the overall pesticide loads, but within the fields, there's not much improvement.
Yeah, okay. So what you're saying is not all weeds are equal.
Exactly.
So some weeds have value and others don't.
Yeah, exactly. Because I mean, why do they have value? Because they again, for the soil, they also have roots, and they can also stabilize the soil. They can prevent erosion of the soil. Many of them are flowering. They produce nectar, and this nectar is used, for example, by parasitic wasps who feed on this nectar, but then lay their eggs in the aphid of the crop nearby.
Okay.
So they're part of the ecological system that is necessary for those functioning of the systems, and then to harness ecosystem services.
Yeah, okay. No, that makes sense. Just sort of looking ahead, you mentioned the living lab projects that have been going on for multiple years. If you were to look forward for the next sort of 10 years, what are your hopes and what are your concerns?
Well, my hope is, of course, that we manage to establish a proper science and funding system where we have a better connection between basic research, field experimentation, and transfer of this knowledge into the farming systems, and again with the feedback process, learning from the farming system as we discussed, and have a system that is working like that when it comes to farming, also the funding of the farmers to continue with this, because I see a strong potential here to transform farming, to redesign farming more from the bottom up with such systems. But at the same time, my hope would be that we get a better understanding of how to incentivize farmers, as we discussed before, have payments for production of common goods, of benefits, which are in addition to producing food or other bio-based products. So give the farmer also money for producing such services for society. And this will become part of our CAP systems in Europe. If we do not go this way, we will not be able to deal with this divide between environmental issues, but also societal issues, health issues, and food security.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, because I don't think it's stuff that is generally considered. But when you look at the health of soil and the health of the local ecosystem, it directly impacts the health of the crop that's being grown, and then the health of the people that are consuming it. So it's a looped system.
Mm.
Just to sort of wrap things up a little bit, what would be the key lessons that you've learned through all of your research and the work that you've done at the Living Lab? So what would be the sort of top 3 things that farmers could do to improve biodiversity? I think you've probably covered some of those already. And what would be the top sort of 3 things that people at home can do in their backyards to also improve soil health or biodiversity?
Yeah. For both the farmers and the people with the back gardens, what's important is to acknowledge heterogeneity and diversity in their gardens, but also in their farms. You have to have a spatial and a temporal perspective to this. So you have to diversify your production spatially and temporally. You have to take care about the soil in the way that you have also resting soil, so that you shouldn't disturb your soils too much. But at the same time, you may have to apply the wider landscape perspective when it comes to farming, but also in your garden. It could be also the wider perspective. So not only looking at this one plot where you grow your legumes or whatever, or your vegetables, but also to have a look at the rest of your garden. So how does it look like? Do you have trees in your garden? Do you have also a kind of hedgerow? Do you have a nice patch of grass which you are not mowing every second day, or things like that? And of course, again, you may want, if you have fruit trees, you need your pollinators in spring, your mason bees coming to pollinate your apples. You can provide them with nesting habitats. Mason bees like to nest in cavities, and you can provide those cavities for those bees. There's a lot you can do to stimulate the existence of such organisms and service providers in your garden, but also in your agricultural systems. And when it comes to the agricultural system, this is basically what you have to do in the landscape. So often, as a farmer, if you have a really large patch of land, you can do it all on your own. What we learn is now that in many farming systems where you have in one area many farmers working, that they have to work in collaboratives to design the landscape. So you have to see that the landscape is heterogeneous, has a lot of same natural habitat, that you have proper linear elements of such same natural habitats connecting the individual fields across the landscape. And together you have to diversify the system. Sometimes you cannot deal with long crop rotations on your own because you basically do not have the number of fields required. Then you can work with your neighbors to do that. So basically we have to find a way of increasing heterogeneity of the landscape, working together as farmers to do this in a joint venture, and as gardeners with your in your individual gardens, you can do probably very similar things, but on much smaller scales.
And how important do you think initiatives like the Yard Festival is for knowledge sharing and linking researchers to farmers, and trying to get that balance between theory and practice, and that sort of knowledge dissemination?
I think that's it's very important to have such festivals or field days because that's where this co-learning happens. Because if I join the Yacht Festival, it's not because I want to go there and teach farmers how to do things. I also go there to learn from the farmers. The farmer you mentioned, I'm really looking forward to meeting him and to learn from him and see, learn his ideas and see how he's trying to innovate his farming. And this again, those impressions I can take with me and speak to our farmers and tell them, look, this is a guy I met in Norway, and this is what he's doing. What do you think about this for your farming system? And this is a way of exchange we need. And of course, we need the exchange of farmers to farmers, of course, also of the wider society, visiting the farms, learning how farming works actually, and taking this home, because I mean, this is also to learn. If you know how food is produced, then when you go to the shop, you may have a better idea of where for which food to look for to buy. And so yeah, I mean, those festivals or field days are really important to learn about farming and learn from farmers, but also give ideas back into the farming system.
And importantly, we've got a local brewery running the bar as well. So I think that's where some of the some of the meaningful conversations are going to be held as well.
Exactly. Yeah, the best ideas you get over a nice glass of beer.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a real pleasure talking to you, Jens, and thank you for your time and going through all of this. It's a fascinating area, and there's almost too much to go through. It feels a little bit rushed in some ways because we haven't even talked about mycelium and some of the other environmental inputs that we can have. There's a huge amount we could cover off, but really appreciate your expertise and your time. Do you have any online channels that people can follow you, or is it just the Institute's links for your papers?
The Institute's website, yeah.
Okay,
yeah. We'll the project websites.
Yeah, I, especially around the living lab side of things, I think that would be of real interest to farmers, because I guess it's probably the same in Germany, but in the UK and in Norway, we're seeing different farmers at different points of the journey. You know, so some are just looking at this because the cost of pesticides and fertilizers and diesel as well is just getting higher and higher, and there's just greater economic pressures on farmers. And I think others are, you know, some of the older ones that have done things in traditional ways are retiring, younger ones coming in that are looking at how can they change things, how can they do things differently, and others that are just looking and going, actually, we're the only mammal that poisons the local ecosystem to stop any other insects or mammals from eating our food. We poison it and then we consume it. You know, how does that make any sense?
I'm not sure whether we're the only ones, but yeah, we're doing it on a global scale, and that's scary.
Yeah, great stuff.
Okay, we stay in touch, and I'll send you
good man.
The links.
Yeah, thanks, Jens. Take care of yourself. All the best.
Yeah.
Cheers.